The worst part of what's going on in Israel and Palestine is the war crimes. But the second worst part, at least for me personally, is the way that this one state, this foreign entity, tears apart Jewish communities across the world by dividing us into camps, those who are indoctrinated by their propaganda and those who aren't. This video is really directed at my fellow American Jews who support Palestinian liberation, but I hope that anyone else watching will be able to glean some new perspective from it as well. If you were raised anything like me, you were probably exposed to tremendous amounts of Israeli propaganda while you were growing up. For me, I went to Jewish schools my whole life and was constantly bombarded with this stuff. I gave some examples in my last video on this subject, but I want to talk about a few more, because I'm going to ask you to do something very difficult if you're encountering other Jews who support Israel, and that is to be patient with them. And I know the idea of being patient with these people is frustrating, especially if you've already deprogrammed yourself and seen through the propaganda, because you're just wondering why they can't see the obvious reality in front of them. I've had incredibly powerful and important conversations in the past few weeks with former classmates and other people I grew up with who have only just now started to realize how much propaganda they were subjected to as a kid and how that affected their thinking on Israel. For some of them, it has taken this latest crisis to finally realize that the occupation is wrong. So let me talk about just a few of the things I experienced growing up. Just a few examples. I probably could think of hundreds if I dug deep enough. But listen, we've only got time for a couple. When I was in 11th grade, my class, just the 11th graders, were brought into the school library where a man spoke to us. This man claimed that he used to be a member of Hamas and that he had actually visited Israel intending to scope out a plan to carry out an attack. But, he said, the IDF caught him, and they brought him to an interrogation room, and after he finally admitted what he was up to, they were so nice to him that he realized Israel was the good guys, and now he travels the world giving speeches like that one. I didn't think anything of this until I was at a Shabbat dinner in college, hosted by one of the local Jewish organizations on campus. And another man spoke to us, and he had, surprise, what a coincidence, the same story. At which point I thought, hold on, what's the likelihood that two guys were both Hamas terrorists and both of them were just given hospitality by the IDF and became speakers who tour the world giving these speeches? What are the likelihood that both of them are telling the truth? There is a small cottage industry of people who travel to Jewish youth groups and give these speeches. Another story. In my school, every 10th grade class took a trip to Israel for 6 weeks. On one night, they brought us into a room, and a bunch of Israelis ran into the room pretending to be Hamas operatives. The idea was we would see how we reacted in that situation. Now, what was the point of this terrifying exercise? It was to make us understand that anything Israel does to the Palestinian people is to prevent a scenario like that. Again, we were in 10th grade. We were 15 or 16 at the time. What was the purpose of this other than to convince us that Israel can do no wrong and that the alternative to Israel is a bunch of dead Jews? My final example also comes from that trip. We took a bus ride to a Bedouin encampment somewhere in Israel, I don't remember where, and we had tea at one of the Bedouins' houses. After we left, an Israeli soldier came aboard our bus and told us to get out of there right now because they had word that a group of Palestinians were about to attack our bus. We never heard about that after we left, never any follow-up on whether or not that attack ended up happening, and my assumption is that it was some sort of psyop to convince us that we had been this close to being victims of such an attack. Attacks which at the time weren't even taking place in Israel. This happened maybe a week after that fake Hamas attack drill we had done back at the Midrashet we were staying on. and I can only assume that they had meant us to link those two things in our mind. To first experience the fake attack, and then to be told that we had almost experienced a real one. And you have to begin to realize that people exposed to this level of propaganda growing up are more likely to believe it than to believe that everything they've been told to fear is a lie. So again, I want to implore you to be patient with your fellow Jews who support the occupation, because they have been exposed to quite literally some of the most insane propaganda I've ever seen in my life. It's hard for me to even believe that I'm standing here and telling you these things. It's hard to believe that a foreign government would spend that much effort to psychologically warp children who live halfway across the world. But they did so exactly so that those people would support them during a time like this, so that they would view their war crimes as a justifiable and necessary response to a threat against all Jews everywhere. And to begin to deprogram these people is to understand what they've been through, to understand that a lot of their opinions are not their fault. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't work to try and bring them onto the side of empathy and justice. It just means that you have to be very careful how you approach the topic, because they are primed and ready to recall those memories of all that propaganda they were fed and to reject anything you have to say, to shut the conversation down before it can become productive.